Admitting some more. Hopefully, everybody's joining. If you have not or don't have your morning beverage of choice, please be sure to grab it. It's way more fun to start with a good coffee or, water, whatever. Hi, Gretchen. Just making sure nobody else is popping into our lovely morning party. All right. I feel like I should have had music or something playing. I'm sorry, I'm not that great at the Zoom vibes. And I even noticed that I didn't jump in on the changing who's facilitating. So forgive me, forgive me. Um, Morning. All righty. We got a couple more coming in, and then it's just me running this. So I'm like in it to win it, and it's going to be lovely. I can't wait to talk about vocabulary. Who doesn't want to talk about vocabulary on a Sunday morning? Saturday. It's Saturday. Let's not wish the weekend away. If you have not caught on, we are recording and getting everything ready. Okay. Um, Obviously, if you've been on these book club meetings, you got to hang out with Gabby last weekend, and she loves to use the chat and say, all the wonderful things. And so if you feel like things come up, questions, I am good with all of those kind of protocols. Unmute, throw it in the chat. I will do my best to catch it as we get started. So we are looking at chapter 6 of the book, The Next Steps in Literacy Instruction. And so it's really going to be wonderful. Today, I'm your facilitator. It is not Jeanette. It is me. My name is Sarah Rowse-Borrelli. I'm a board member of the Reading League and currently serving as the 4K through 12 program administrator for literacy in the Menominee Falls School District. So loads of fun. Life has changed for those of you who know me personally. But today we're looking at chapter 7. I might have opened up the wrong. I did. Oh, no, I did not. The wrong sides, but I did not. So we're going to look at, these are kind of our 4 learning targets today. Let me get some more party participants in. And we'll get started. Does anybody have any like burning questions about vocabulary? I think for me, one of the things that I was thinking about as reading was like, oh, this really connects to some of the background pieces that we've done. And like, who doesn't love talking about vocabulary? Like I said. All right. So our 4 learning targets today, those of you who are just joining us, we're hoping to elaborate on the interconnections of comprehension and vocabulary. We're going to discuss some of the many ways to improve vocabulary skills in the classroom and share a little about some formative assessments for vocabulary skills and what we can do with them, as well as review how data can inform instruction with vocabulary. A nice little start to the morning. All right. So if you want to, I don't care how you do it. If you want to open your screens, put your numbers up. But where is your knowledge on vocabulary instruction? Kind of give me a little background. I'm going to guess, if I was to guess, I think I know where everybody's going to put their hands at. Or if you would like, you can even, it's trying to get creative on the Zoom of like, put it in the, like you can put it in the chat. You can, use the parts of Zoom. I think there's even like a number piece, but are you a one? Explicitly teaching vocabulary is not a strength. I focus on bold words and that's it. Are you a two? Are you a three? Or are you a four? I'm seeing some twos and threes, and that is exactly what my prediction was going to be, which is great. I love it. I love it. Um, so I think too, when we're looking at all of this, we've constantly learning how to improve vocabulary instruction, and that's where we're living. We're living in that 2 and 3. I've found vocabulary routines are just wonderful, and it kind of lives in that world. And as I was saying, a lot of this comes with some background knowledge. So if you've lived in this world of vocabulary or thinking about vocabulary, it's important to remember that only 5 to 10% of instructional time is devoted to vocabulary instruction. And one of the things that really stuck with me over the last 5 years is that students need 12 to 14 exposures to words and their meanings to fully learn them. And I don't know about you, but my educational experience 20 years ago, all right, let's go back 30 years ago, was not, it was here's the bold words, find the definitions, this is what you get. And then when that same concept, when we know better, we do better. So in doing better and knowing better, what am I doing as an instructor to help make vocabulary kind of important? And so for me, I've spent a lot of time in these books, which is why I kind of have them on background knowledge. Teaching Words and How They Worked was our book study last year. I think Bringing Words to Life was 2 to 3 years ago. Our school's done some on reading comprehension, and then Morpheme Magic was presented at the Reading League Conference 2 years ago. So if you haven't been exposed to those books, take a screenshot, definitely check them out. Because I think teaching the meanings of important words before learning allows that schema, allows that background knowledge, and prepares them for learning and comprehending. One of the big discussions that we're having in my current life is where does this show up in all disciplines? And I think vocabulary is the touch point for that. So if you maybe kind of glossed over this, here's a brief summary of kind of what chapter 7 did in its discussion. So comprehension and vocabulary go hand in hand. I can read this to you, but I'm assuming you all are pretty good at it. And we know that this chapter emphasizes moving beyond basic word recognition to deeper understanding. That is not new information. And I think those tiered word selections, that's what a big part of Marzano. And I've seen Freddie Hebert keep talking about it right now too. And I think it's important that as teachers, we really need to focus on tier 2 and tier 3 words to maximize impact. If thinking about that, and there's always those labels, it's like the high frequency or the domain specific, and there's that, or it's also just the ones that are going to enhance learning or are incredibly important to the instruction. Vocabulary is an integrated part with literacy. And I know I watched Gabby's last week, and she was just talking about how much vocabulary connected to the speaking and listening elements. And for me, in my take, I think rich vocabulary instruction, but also rich vocabulary discussion enhances that inferencing and comprehension. And then it's showing up in those writing tasks. But there are so many great instructional strategies. And we'll get to a little bit of that today as well. But when we're talking about this, we're really framing it in that explicit instruction. And some of our Reading League board members, our board president was hanging out with Anita Archer this week, getting some more information around explicit instruction. You know, there's a lot of great learning consistently happening. And I think too, in books like this, if anyone got to hear Susan Smartt at the Title I conference, this was a lot of great information around here as well. One thing that I think is really important when it comes to vocabulary is that number 2 and number 3, we're combining word learning modes and then having that repeated exposure. Are there any big questions that came out of, you know, chapter 7 that you were like, I really hope we get answered? I'm going to go with silence is compliance, I guess. I don't know. All right. So much of vocabulary instruction is really structured into this idea of the depth and the breadth. And this idea I've seen show up both in the comprehension blueprint as well as in the next steps to literacy instruction. But when we're thinking about choosing words, but also when we're thinking about what do kids need to know, how well does the individual know the word? That's the depth. Are they able to use it in multiple uses? That shows up a little bit too in the latter part with some of that assessment that we'll talk about. Then we talk about fluency and rate in which the individual gains the access to the meaning of words in context in which it's used. So many disciplines try to just rely on the contextual clues. And so if we pre-teach it, if we see it again and again, thinking about those multiple exposures, and how do we connect that? How many words can they recognize at a more general level through that breadth piece? And I think for me, this was a really important part to remember because we think we want to go beyond just like how many words can they pop off and into this idea of like how many words can they use to make their word consciousness better. That's a big, it's a big thing. And I think for me, I've seen this really easy. Okay, I lied. It's not easy. Something that shows up really nicely in secondary, but even going back as I have all of my children are in elementary, their vocabulary is way more fun than even some of my former secondary students was like, oh, wow, I love listening to you all talk. Please try to use these words. I love how you're figuring this out. So we know that vocabulary is learned through both direct explicit and indirect implicit. And so thinking about our structures in our classrooms or how we're coaching to that, what are some of those ways that we can expound on that vocabulary instruction? And this book talked a lot about these. These were their ideas, reading orally to students. I know that shows up a lot in a lot of the new curriculums that are being implemented in and around Wisconsin. And I know we have some people from Massachusetts. So if you want to jump in and say like, yeah, I do this or I don't, lead and encourage the discussions from using the vocabulary from reading. Like I love a good read aloud, think aloud concept, and including those expository texts and making connections to both like fiction texts and nonfiction texts. And that helps us increase that independent wide reading and, good audiobooks. Verdicts out, you can hear that. As a big audiobook person, I love it. And my kids love it too. Big podcasters at my house. So they're hearing and being exposed to wonderful words. And then they ask the questions like, what does that mean? And there you have that indirect, implicit instruction. But then we also have what we do every day, the direct, explicit. What words and how many? And we come back to those tiers, those familiar ones. And the tier 2, what are we using for instruction? What is necessary for our students to grasp the concepts that we're asking of them? And then what are those low utility or taught with brief explanation? Does every child need to know hypothesis? Yeah, probably that's something they're going to get. That would likely be a tier 2 word, but discombobulation, maybe not so much. And those are just coming out of the top of my head. So you can tell I'm reading like books around science. When we think about that idea, though, we also want to think about how we're instructing to that. So both of that implicit and explicit, but you have those direct and indirect. And so some of these examples show up and can be really fun. And so this is like a little summation of what we saw from both next steps in literacy instruction, but also just background knowledge we've already had, the definition, context, information about targeted word, thinking about how we actively use prior knowledge, comparing and contrasting. That was a big thing that showed up in this chapter. We come back to that just-in-time instruction where we're all kind of living. And then how varied activities intend to develop interest and awareness. One of the things that I took from this and I've taken from a lot of our vocabulary moments is becoming word conscious and creating word consciousness. And I think these opportunities allow our students to do that. And so things that we can do comes back to those routines, to come back to academic language, creating that morphological awareness and teaching individual words, provide children with frequent and extensive varied experience, and then fostering independence and back to, again, that word consciousness. So I want to give you about 3 minutes to think about these items. And since some of us are living in 2 and some of us are living in 3, I think to me, I'm going to rely on those who put 3s. What are things that you have found have shown a lot of benefit to your work in your day-to-day life. So take a moment. I'm going to give you like a minute, truly a minute, and think about where you would live, not where you'd live, but what was something that of this list of activities and suggestion that came from the book that you could see, like, I've had so much success with that, and share it out, please. Thank you all. Carrie shared that instruction in morphology. I have to agree with you. Our 7th and 8th graders have had a lot of success when they started to add in that morphology piece, and I love that. We implemented Morpheme Magic, and it's been incredibly helpful at my previous school district. And Jill, I love what you're saying, that nonfiction text, which usually provides opportunities, that is wonderful. And I think that too kind of connects that context or context clues as well. I love acting out vocabulary words. Oh, Lori, tell us more. This theater world in me is like, act them out. Tell me, show me. What would that look like? Christina, I'm familiar. Some lessons are super awesome with those vocabulary heavy using tier 2 knowledge. It's been the need to know. That's hard. And that's a part of the planning and workflow that has not been that requires a lot of thought process around that. Oh, and Lori, thank you for adding to that. They say the word, they act it out. Perfect. I can totally see that. I could see a lot of kids having fun with that. Oh, Bonnie, thank you for those graphic organizers. That would make sense. I will have to go back and try to locate those. I think word parts that systematic way. That sounds like we're all in alignment with kind of what this book was saying. And I think that that's wonderful. I can tell you that vocabulary routines were really great when it comes to the disciplines at the upper grades, but also in some of the lower grades as well. Like, hey, every time we're pre-reading, let's look at our vocab focus words or whatever we want to call them. And this is really helpful. I think morphological awareness can also show up K-12 very easily and super fun way when we think about like how they create their words. There's something about letting kids create words to like then connect the definitions to. That's super awesome. These are super wonderful ways. Thank you all for sharing. And again, I like this section was really great because it was a lot of background information. Unfortunately, I can't say I got a lot of new ideas, but I think part of this work and what we're hoping to get from the book study today is just how to connect with each other around some of those best practices. Now, from that, what did shock me, and I put it in here in blue, came with the assessments piece. So each of these are wonderful activities that you're sharing, but where are we looking at when it comes to assessments? The next steps in literacy instruction did give us some options for assessments, and I kind of talked a little bit about those. And if you've used those and you want to share insight on that, please unmute or throw it in the chat. But one of those informational formative assessments. I don't know if I missed that, spelled that. Please forgive me. And then one that I absolutely love is the core vocabulary screening. If you've never used that, I'm a big fan of it. Then you have your computer adaptive tests, your DIBELS, your Acadians, I believe, and I have to get back to that. Please forgive me. And then the CBMRs, Lexia, Reading Plus. And the maze reading comprehension. Thank you. I'm so glad, Kim, you said that because that is one that I also find so much importance in. And then it kind of comes with what some of those instructional pieces happen after. What this book taught me that was a new takeaway was that Newhouse oral language screening tool. Has anyone used that or enjoyed it or have thoughts on it? It's pretty Southern. Thanks, Bonnie. You're right. It really is. So when I looked that up, I was like, oh, let's talk about this. So I've linked it here just as a kind of a point of reference. Um, and if you've not looked at it, I can put these slides in the chat. But this was their idea of like, it kind of talks about the education center. So of course you're wanting to see and what they're doing. They talk and have a lot of options as connected to, and I think you could say the same with the text project. What I found was the questions that they're asking. So they have some sample, like their normed pieces of it comes with where this shows up. So the mastery checks are central to 4 questions. So if you're looking here, it's their screening. And then their benchmarks are very simple. Can they name 14, 15, 18 and a half, 22, and 25 by 6th grade? So it wasn't a difficult test, I think, to give, but in a 2-minute screening, student names items in 4 categories. They have 30 seconds in each category. The teacher denotes the items with a hash or slash mark, and all 4 categories have been presented. They tally the marks, divide the total by 2. Like, it's very easy to give and can be incredibly informative. So the 4 things are things in your classroom: fruits, vegetables, animals, and states in the United States. And one would assume that with instructional progression, this would make be easy. I didn't think of anything like that. And so it was like, oh, I wonder. And I think too, when you look at different types of vocabulary assessment, the core one really talks about what knowledge they have. And I really enjoy that one. And I think too, I think Bonnie said it too, the maze is really helpful. If you haven't explored that, definitely do so. Again, it's just another resource. And there was some, I always like learning. So that's why we're here, right? And so thinking about that. But a part that I wanted to point out is the questions in the yellow. When we're thinking about vocabulary and what are our assessments telling us and how do we respond? So which students are at risk based on the core vocabulary screener? So let's use that as the example. For me, I would take that as, hey, my students are below strategic. So I think it's benchmark. I haven't looked at it for a while. So if those benchmark kids, what would I need to do? And for that, some of the best interventions can be just bringing them, pre-teaching the vocabulary before they come to the class. Like, that's a 5-minute, hey guys, I want you to look at this word, or I'm going to give you a challenge. And let's start with this. I want you to come together knowing this definition. And then every time we see it, and this is great for ELs, this is great for any students who's just struggling, but kind of breaking down the number of vocabulary that they would have, and then having a focused listening concept as they're going into it. The other piece that can become, once you figured out those students at risk, is that coming back to what's the cause and weakness and which reading skills need to be taught before this plan. So maybe it's that they still can't decode, or they just have been taught that, like, you skip over words you don't know. Now, that unfortunately has been a part of past practices. That might not be the best part, but if we're explicitly giving them that heads up and then giving them those little challenges that come with it, that can be really insightful. One of those other pieces did come back, and I think because Bonnie put it, or Kim put it on there with the maze and reading comprehension, I do think that that's an incredibly informative assessment. And I've used it frequently in combination with fluency and that core vocabulary screener, because again, if they understand the syntactical knowledge that it takes to close, to make that a common sense sentence, that also highlights their comprehension. So any thoughts or questions or kind of ideas around assessments and responsiveness, or even like wins in your own classroom and experiences that you'd want to share? If you have them, unmute, or you may throw them in the chat. Bonnie, I love that you asked that question. How does knowledge of grammar and parts of speech impact some of these screeners? I find grammar a weak point in many students right now. Um, I have a thought on that, but I don't need to answer right away. Does anybody have any insights that they would like to add to Bonnie's question? It's wonderful, Lori. Like anytime we see students who grow, it always makes us feel wonderful. And Kim, I'm kind of with you. I think grammar and fluency go hand in hand. I think the part that grammar shows up is what I've seen in past practices and past experiences come to the idea that grammar is taught outside of like basic sentences. And so when we think about how to connect grammar within just the simple sentence structures, one thing I really enjoyed um, actually came from the writing revolution. And in that, I'm thinking, I want to say Hasbrook, and it's not. Hockman really does a nice job of connecting how the parts of speech show up in the single sentence, and then you bring that into that single sentence. And so, like one thing that we talked about is like that because, but, so, and well, because, but, so are just conjunctions. Well, if they understand that, what is that telling us? So then, what follows a conjunction? And so, kind of connecting ideas around grammar and parts of speech to instruction that comes back into that fluency piece, as Kim's mentioning, can be really insightful. I think when we teach grammar in isolation, a lot of our students struggle because they just think of like almost putting it in this box, where in some ways literacy is more like a spaghetti and they're kind of all woven together versus like a waffle where everything's just in its own little box. And I think when instruction happens and we really talk about grammar and parts of speech, your parts of speech as an adult, how often have you been like, oh, that's a noun, let's label all the nouns, or that's a verb? But it's almost like, hey, remember how Nike asked you to just do it? That's a verb. They're asking you to verb it out. Like, what would we do with that? What are you just doing? And that's simple for action verbs. It's in the more nuanced part when it comes to like gerunds or something. And that comes back with the types of vocabulary used to instruct to grammar, but also to other ideas that connect to it. So I love that question, and I agree with you. And I like I said, if anybody has other insights, I'm just a single person with ideas. That doesn't mean that I'm the one with the answers. But I love that you brought it up because I think back to your question, how do they impact some of the screeners? I think it's also that informative nature of if they're showing up low in these screeners, then it's also maybe that they have some struggles with connecting the concepts of grammar too, or because grammar was taught in isolation and not woven together like spaghetti. I included on this slide these yellow questions because I do think these are the big questions that come for allowing us to be responsive and no matter what level or what tier or what does that look like? A lot of conversations have been coming around small groups. Maybe that's just in my own work. But I think that kind of centralizing back to what are those questions asking makes us allows us to make really informed decisions. So with that, we've done a little discussion questions, but I put two up here. If you're feeling inclined, what do we know about improving vocabulary skills in the classroom? And can you share a specific example where an assessment led to meaningful instructional shift or created improved word consciousness for a student or group of students? I think Lori was able to share a little bit about using the corrective reading as intervention. But if you have something else, we can start with first discussion question. Like I said, I'll give you about a minute to two to think about this, and you're welcome to then add your responses to the chat or unmute and we can discuss further. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Carrie. Core vocabulary is very eye-opening and it shows limited vocabulary in everyday language. I think that it is, I completely agree with you. And I think too, one of those, like, what do we know about improving vocabulary skills in the classroom? It is that importance of multiple exposures over time. It can't just be know the bold words and define them. It's let's play this. Let's play with this word. If I'm going to talk about, can't even think of a really great word. Rachel, that's interesting. Vocabulary should be defined as using kid-friendly language. After reading Bringing Words to Life, I started using the Co-Build dictionary and the author mentioned it. Yes. And I think too, vocabulary allows you to up the rigor a little bit. If you're giving them that option to really enhance and connect both beyond the kid-friendly language, there's that caution around what happens with the drift. That's like when we lower to kid-friendly language, they can also be that question of, did we bring it down to an easy level? And Kim loves using a vocabulary web. I agree. So as I think about these discussion questions, and again, they're kind of just like, what do we know? How could you share? The next slide, if it works. Ooh, I skipped it. This kind of was some ideas, and this again came directly from the comprehension blueprint actual, but it kind of comes back to some things that we can do to help create this vocabulary to understand. This was something I shared with some staff about creating and utilizing vocabulary routines. And so if you have not, oh, I love that. Thought about it or looked at this, sentence stems, word knowledge surveys, they were very similar to the suggestions that were made in the book. I'm a big proponent of a Freyer model, but I also love moving beyond it. And so you can see at the top of each of these, they have more types of routines. And I actually too love the idea of a word wizard. And that is a very cute word, wizard, Rachel. Very cute. I feel like your kids are going to latch onto that. And I think too, when we think about how do we make vocabulary fun, it goes beyond those context clues, or some of these are past practices, tools for morphology. I've linked Freddie Hebert's text project to this as well. So if you haven't explored her there, a lot of wonderful things that are connected to how vocabulary works. And she's a proponent of AI. And so she was just on Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. I like thinking about what you just said, those word maps and how to have those core vocabulary resources. So if you haven't explored her, I definitely would. Having met her personally, I'm kind of a fangirl over her. She's very enjoyable of a human. Oof. Go back to sharing, my apologies. And so I kind of broke this down too, is that idea to deepen connection and analysis. Oh, Carrie, thanks. I'm glad it was an excellent podcast. I definitely I like them a lot. They're fun energy. So as we kind of connect and round out a little bit of thoughts today, take these as suggestions. Again, there's a lot of wonderful suggestions in the book, especially in that past practice piece, the taco word, the vocabulary word diary. And it really does go back to everything that we've allowing them those frequent, extensive, and varied experiences with language. And that idea of two picture sorts, that's something that they connect to, but then using the close reading strategies for the dialogic reading, I like that. Some people are calling that more of the shared reading, or connecting that to the pictures and when to use it, which I think even in that when to use, you can connect to the grammar and whatnot. So with that, as we come back to those discussion questions, I'll give you one last option. Is there anything you want to share? What do we know about vocabulary skills? We have lots of resources. We've got lots of tools. We've got great podcasts to listen to if we're still curious about it. We're still living to that 2 and want to move to the 3 or to the 4. And again, if anybody wants to share examples like how you're going to create word wizards, that's wonderful. So I'll give you like 2 seconds to make a decision, decide whether you want to share or not. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking and kind of round this out. And ending with, did we meet our, ooh, Bonnie, love you, thank you. How does cultural roots or AI influence the accuracy acquisition of vocabulary? I do not mind slang or cultural meaning, but how do we teach it accuracy? I think that came up, if anyone wants to jump in on this, but my take is that on that question, it was something in the state of Wisconsin when we talked about when the new standards came out, the idea of standard English was a big part of it. So like the standards were written in the idea of standard English versus acceptable English. And I know that there's a lot of people right that out now talking around how do your cultural roots impact your language and language processing, but also through like your vocabulary. I think when it comes to the question of accuracy, it also comes back to like what's I'm kind of curious on where that's at. I don't know if I have a strong answer to that. But I think that how do we teach accuracy is a matter of almost teaching why academic or standard English is of used. Oh, wow. I think everybody's worried about AI, but I also think there's something to be said about what AI can do both ways to that. I think it's a very valid concern. I don't have an answer to that, but it's a great question to keep thinking about. If anybody else does, you're welcome to unmute or respond. I do know that AI does not have that great of a vocabulary. They're pretty basic in their word responses. I think there's two answers, like there's two parts to that I'm looking at your question when you said you're not a strict standard English person. And again, I'm curious too of like limited nuance can happen frequently. It may not happen just with AI. I think that limited nuance comes with also how we instruct and how word choice and word consciousness and thinking back to like in connection to writing or in connection to discussions, if a student is just using very simple words, I think back almost to like that 6 traits way back in the day where you were almost like teaching kids like use the fancy words or use that and then the nuance piece, but it's connecting to voice. The AI voice is very bland, but where does a child and a student come up to like creating their voice in a way that's is the nuance piece? And if we're teaching to how much more excitement comes both with variety of sentences, variety of word choice, allowing and promoting more personal voice into that, whether that is the slang or the cultural pieces too. How do we like almost blend those ideas together? I think that comes in the connection to the wide reading. I think Joss Stone does a really nice job in some of her books that allow that the idea of the cultural concepts to play out to give that idea of student voice. And it goes back to the idea of the concept of using audiobooks. When does it feel great? I feel like I've seen a couple things come around where it's like 5-word sentences. Along those lines. So you're just saying teaching vocabulary based on the social role or the action of the interaction, stopping a child running the street or asking someone to leave so the group picture can see off. I'm not following that last part, but oh, okay. Yeah, and I think that AI prompt comes back to like how are we getting what we want out of it? Got some great options. I appreciate the questions. Thank you. Oh, got it. I think back to those ideas of prompts again, it's like vocabulary is all interconnected. And if we're really specific, if we're really thinking about how this would show up, and then encouraging kids to listen and do that wide reading, that should also support the growth of vocabulary. So we're getting kind of close to our time, and I want to offer any more. I love this conversation, and I think when we connect the AI piece to it, it's very throws in a lot of variables. And I don't feel like I've answered your question, but I think hopefully we've got something to think about for all of us. But with that, I want to bring us back to, did we meet our learning targets today? There were those interconnections to comprehension and vocabulary. Hopefully we have addressed that. We had many ways to improve vocabulary skills, I think focusing on the depth, breadth, and fluency, as well as considering those types of words and how we're teaching them. We discussed a little bit on the assessments for vocabulary and what we can do with that as a way to be responsive. And that number 4, I guess, review how data can inform instruction with vocabulary. How do we make those moves to small groups? How do we move that to interventions, and what questions do we ask? I would say we met the learning targets, but if you don't think we have, please jump in on the chat and let me know what else we need to address. Or unmute. No problem, Sarah. I can definitely share these slides. Probably should have on the front end. All right. I will put this in the chat shortly. And if anybody wants to stay on or share, I will get this PDF and get this all shared out to you as you need it. With regard to getting any other pieces of information, just know that next August 2nd, I think it's me again. We're going to read the elements of lifetime of reading. And if you have not looked at chapters 3 or 4, 5, 6, or those other chapters, they are available on YouTube, so you can go back and check it out. You can visit us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. On our YouTube, those are where those past practices around phonics and decoding, as well as fluency. Gabby's last week with reading comprehension. This was recorded and will be posted on to talk about vocabulary and some of those other pieces. And if you have not signed up to come to our, if you want to come to the live stream or into the conference in Brookfield, Wisconsin, please do so. If you stay on, I will put this in the chat and you can have access to the PDF. I really enjoyed spending the morning with you all, and hopefully you've enjoyed this book study. The certification of completing the book study will be sent next week. So you'll fill out a form and tell me what days you want, and then we'll send the certificates for you all, because I imagine everybody needs professional development hours and whatnot. But if there's any questions that come up that the Reading League can help you with here in the state of Wisconsin or outside, please let us know. Go enjoy your rainy way. I think it's still raining in Wisconsin. I'm in the basement, so I don't know. But otherwise, thank you all for being here. Stay on, and I will stop sharing and make this PDF available for you all. Thank you, guys. Have a great day. I'm going to just download this all as a PDF, and then I'll put it in the chat in like 2 seconds. There you go. Is the PDF of the slides. You guys are wonderful. Stay on if you have questions, if you need anything. Otherwise, enjoy your day.